A reading from Animal Money, a novel by Michael Cisco. It happened most often when I would throw a glance at him sidelong. The light flashing across his surface would reveal for an instant another city of yawning white squares as vast as canyons striped with stark shadows of hard-edged black. Tiny windows like arrow slits in blank, furnace white walls. Silent, coordinated action of people, machines, and animals, seen from a distance. A naked pair, copulating in the center of an empty white quad a mile wide, coming together in the great white space under black sky, the luminous erection of the teeming. A narrow handcart with stacked jars of human brains sloshing in formaldehyde, all sandwiched between sheets of thick glass. A dancing figure with balls of bright blue flame between his fingers, playing them across his fingers so they gambol and skip over the scorched, puckering skin like frisking little animals. The dancer seems at first to be a silhouette, and then you noticed he's scorched black all over. Then, into a vast chamber, illuminated by a faceted red bolt of sunset that leans across the void like a dim chevron. In its footprint are carpets that absorb and glow hotly with the light, and mosaic inlays coolly sparkling. The sun crimsons its red right in the center of the single colossal window, high atop a great cascade of crescent stairs, with one spacious hallway landing halfway up, on which there stands a monumental fountain of some clear material. The place is filled with people attired in a carnival profusion of ceremonial finery, masks, feathers, robes, scapulars, stoles, winged hats, girdles, anklets, skirts, albs, paint, and so on. Smoke rises from the censers. People walk in labyrinth patterns, and sourceless music cries and shouts like an incessant chord. Countless voices and timbres swaying through the minutes like sunbeams swaying under water, going in and out of a wandering, urgent harmony. Dancers spill down from the landing, one central dancer with a red headdress and the rest of them in white and carrying swords that slice off their long braids as they spin. Mist bubbles from the fountain. Water acts like smoke, rising in webs and coils up into the air. Smoke acts like water, tossed in heavy globules and splashing in the clear basin. The people waiting to receive the dancers as they elaborate their way down the stairs are also dancing in brief repeated gestures. Some form lines and bow, raising and lowering their heads like pistons. Others drop down into a sort of curtsy and then up again. Others frolic arm in arm, leaping high. When the dancers have arrived, everyone turns and goes out through a pair of double doors that swing gigantically open to reveal a sunset garden park with flower beds and charcoal smudge trees and all kinds of wild animals. The people enjoy the garden park. They nod like flowers, wave their hands up and down like tree branches, start and stare like wild animals, glint in the fading sunlight like the windows of the shrine with red sunlight pouring out through its green door. The trees are like the breathing fringe of the twilit sky, reflecting timelessly melancholy thin sweetness in the softening shadows, while the promenaders are half melted into living smoke creatures by the gloom. Then the sun drops below the horizon, and the moon jumps up over the trees, engraving all of us with dark vividness against the indigo dusk, everything swinging from red to blue, just like that. The promenaders stop where they are and gaze up at a moon that fills nearly all the sky, throwing dimly clear shadows behind the trees, breaking up their smeared huddle so each one stands distinct again. The events of the day unfold shapelessly. People are getting up and going to bed, working, relaxing, all the time. There are no frenzied commuter hours, and there is no diminuendo after a certain time at night. Activity is constant, but less intense. Essia sleeps for about half the day. Her small bedroom is almost a closet filled with the oven-like glow of baffled sunlight. A knock on the door. The glass man sticks his head in and gurgles. Time to get up. Essia stirs and rises, washes up and eats a typically flavorless Buzzatin breakfast, porridge and hot caffeine water, while reading the newspaper. She checks her money pipe. Buzatian money consists of living jellies, like violet-tinted bubbles that are slick and cool to the touch, but leave no trace on the fingers. The pipe has phosphorescent grooves on its interior, numbered from 1 to 12, with 1 being nearest the bottom to tell you how much you have left. 4, in this case. She smokes a cigarette in the dark room, looking out the window at overcast day, the looming white topless towers and cliff-like black gulfs between them, crisscrossed by thread-like little skyways. Plumes of steam float by, carried off toward the sea. The glass man enters the room and gurgles again. She remains where she is, and he approaches her. Later on, another cigarette, made of tasteless Koskan Kanonan tobacco mist, caught in a thread that revaporizes as it untwists at the heart of a clear glass cigarette, then time for clothes. She lays out the day's ensemble, dresses, and goes out just as the sun veers to its next station in the sky, and all the shadows lean over. This is hard to get used to. She wants to brace herself whenever it happens, as if the planet were a ship on a rolling sea. It is. The air here is cool, dry, and smells like some kind of aromatic chemical. It's almost never an odor she can name. Sometimes it's a little like the old book smell, and sometimes like medicine. The only familiar smell is wood smoke, which is actually the smell given off by the buildings and the soil after it rains. The streets are kept clean by caterpillar-shaped machines that undulate up and down, absorbing dirt. People in the street are courteous but remote. Buzati was once a violent frontier town, and people learned to be very clear in their etiquette. A person with an inadvertently insulting manner wouldn't have lasted long. The manners are all that remain of that time now. Buzatins take pride in being discreet, but in a sort of indiscreet way. They like nothing better than a nimble display of delicacy when it comes to saving face for someone else. So, at one and the same time, they both try to cover for someone else while making themselves conspicuous in the act, and end up causing mischief of another kind. That said, Buzatins regard the unheralded act of reputation rescue, of covering for someone, as particularly noble. The whole of their society works on the basis of merits accumulated in defense of each other's good name. So, a man practically throws his wife at her lover in public, announcing, with a carefully cultivated offhandedness, that he will be away on business on such and such days, and encouraging her and to visit friends, to do entirely as she pleases. Everyone can tell that this is really a public accusation. The wife knows that anyone seeing her in company with that other man will assume infidelity. The lover has been challenged, and now he must inform the husband, within earshot of everyone, that he too is going away for a time, and regrets he cannot attend on the lady. Essia has an appointment with her advisor to discuss the possibility of getting Thafifa assigned to her, or, failing that, having a copy made. She was the best assistant Essia ever had. Essia can't stop thinking about her. Thafifa standing there when they had to say goodbye, her fists in her eyes, crying. Thafifa's sobs echo back to her every single day, heralding a wave of fierce tenderness that leaves Essia aching to hold her. Has she forgotten her? Been assigned to someone else? Essia sighs. Or is she missing her? Lonely, sad, and bored. Pining. What will happen if it works out? Buzatins all live alone. The housing committee took forever to confirm her application for the apartment she's living in, since the glass ban is neither an individual person in the usual sense, nor an appliance or piece of property either. Essia told them she hardly ever removed him from his closet charging station, and that seems to have done it. It was a good thing they didn't ask about to see those so-called charging stations. It was all bullshit. The glass man didn't sleep in her bed, but then he didn't sleep at all. While she slept, he would go out for walks, explore the town, come up with reports of new and interesting places to go, things like that. But Thafifa, as a biological creature who eats and sleeps, would by law have to have her own place. They would have to find their two places side by side. Public transportation is much the same. The cable cars look like long strings of big, clear beads, each of which is a single occupancy car. Only the older trams, which swing precariously through space on skinny, suspended tracks, listing crazily now, have the usual kind of cars. People sit apart anyway, gazing at their hands folded in their laps, or at the floor, or at the aphorisms engraved in chrome panels set into the polished brown bakelite moldings, or out the windows. Buzatins carry no personal electronics of any kind. They wear mechanical watches. The static electricity in the air would fry any ordinary electronic device, and so far no one has been able to devise a form of insulation that does not mysteriously disintegrate after a few days of exposure to the open. The trams and cable cars are all run by reeling spools, lit by faint chemical illumination that glows soft greens and oranges. There's an avid silence out in public. Everyone lives alone, but everyone is expected to be involved with at least one other person. Public displays of affection are icily received, but this is because it's taken for granted that one peck on the cheek, one light embrace, must explode in passion. Anyone capable of holding back, after even the slightest physical overture, is considered impotent. The intense privateness of the Koskan Kanonans extends to sexual practices, and nothing consensual is forbidden, but this means that speculation about each other's sex lives is intense. It's a hallmark of friendship, and considered in the light of an enjoyable pastime, trying to imagine what the people you know get up to. Marriage is unknown, largely because Koskan Kanonan property is distributed bureaucratically. Most Koskan Kanonans are entangled in webs of confused relationships. There are over 70 different kinds of officially registered sexual relationships. This means that most Koskan Kanonans make general assumptions about others, most commonly that everyone is bisexual and involved with at least one person of each gender and then possibly a few constructs. Whether or not this is actually the case is something known only partially, only to certain bureaucrats, and kept secret from the general population at their own request, so that they would not be deprived of the pleasure of speculating. The bureaucracy field that surrounds everything that happens on the planet functions exactly like magic. The bureaucrats are the wizards, and the paperwork are spells. Send a form here, and people gather there, erect a house, fill it with furniture. Essia is looking for the right form for a love spell that will reunite her with Thafifa. Her absence is too painful and distracting. The bureaucracy is ubiquitous and centerless, unlike the government, which is housed in offices with pebble glass doors and cracked leather chairs. Koskan Kanonan politicians are all like private eyes and amateur detectives. Sam Spades, Philip Marlowe's, Miss Marples, Hercule Poirot's, Sherlock Holmes's. They are constantly in motion, interviewing people, irritating the police with their questions and alternate interpretations of events, figuring things out on the fly. They never meet formally. Instead, they're dedicated chroniclers, secretaries, Watsons, boon companions, record their aphorisms and observations, then draw on these to formulate proposals that they circulate among themselves. The proposal that has survived by the end of these punishing rounds of criticism is then implemented by the bureaucrats. There are no elections. Anyone can go to any of the detective politicians. Anyone can try their hand at that particular sort of detective work. Those who haven't got the knack usually drift out of it into something else, maybe becoming companions, maybe plumbers. Plumbers are very highly respected on Koskan Kanona. Watching plumbers, electricians, skilled craftsmen at work is one of the chief forms of entertainment, occupying the place of athletics in other societies. Plumbers, et al., are ranked on a planetary basis, and the top 10 global plumbers are role models, culture heroes, and get profiled on trading cards. Another glance aside, into the crystal ball vortex of the glass man's head. Essia sees herself walking with swift, purposeful steps into the crystal darkness beneath massive low Roman arches, her dark olive face underlit by the soft glow of her white blouse. She climbs a flight of shallow stone steps up to a cathedral-like portico with many pairs of broad, featureless, rectangular doors. The interior is a void, and though not so dark that its great depth and spaciousness could be mistaken, dim lights reach out to her from remote constellations, shining on doors, lining corridors without walls or ceilings. Walking between these modernistic doors, she finds herself flanked by a silent escort of two bald old giants with thick tufts of unkempt hair sprouting above, around, and from their ears to steer her to S233. They pass through a series of sets, each from a different nameless film or painting. There's a 19th century storeroom of bare boards, packing crates, no lights, everything grayed out in the glare from two white windows. Now she's crossing a round rumpus room with white filigree skylights and a shag-carpeted conversation pit around a raised hearth with a white trumpet-shaped flue, like a 1970s jumpsuit future ski lodge. Now they're in a torch-lit ghetto with classical and Egyptian statuary, a Chinese scholar's house with chairs and low desks and carved screens and water feature serenities and pungent lacquer and rustling heavy silks. The scene finally resolves, and Essia is in there alone. The lumbering giants who brought her here just melt away when the time is right. The room seems to be projecting out into space, high up into the mountains. The whole of one side is angled like a big window box, slaty mountains in the distance under a dark lid of clouds, all in sharp telephoto focus. Lightning flashes out there, in between the mountains, silhouetting the nearer ones and lighting up the more distant ones. The room has small tables scattered all over, like the aftermath of a very tidy cocktail party. A swarm of fireflies dance above the hearth. The walls are covered in busy wallpaper, whose chief color is orange, with green and white and yellow and pink and sky blue dingbats and ribbons. There are comparably elaborate rugs. Essia crouches in front of the fireplace and peers at the luminous motes. A shadow crosses the room behind her. It might have stirred up a little draft as it went by, because she turns quickly to look. The shadow is an incomplete figure, colorless and transparent, but as it turns near the window, the daylight illuminates its heart, which is dark blue with chalk-red vessels. Essia homes in on the heart, like a falcon setting a mouse. She says something to the figure, but her voice is drowned out somehow. I tune my hearing until it registers. A steady rumble, as of vast telluric forces stirring and whirring, shakes the air. The hearted shadow goes on moving around the room, straightening pictures on the wall, adjusting and dusting the bric-a-brac. Essia varies the tone of her voice, trying to find a frequency that will get through the vibration. "What's that booming?" she asks, again and again. The shadow pauses. Judging from the rotation of the heart and the rusty outline, the shadow has turned toward her, like someone who thinks they've just heard a ghost. A woman who looks like Kodak Shirley enters the room from behind a secret panel in the bookshelf at the same moment, crosses to where the shadow is, and, watching where she steps, she puts her feet right in the footprints of the shadow and vanishes. Now the shadow has a solid, opaque appearance, the hairless silhouette of a hermaphrodite who seems to have a serpent coiled around its neck. "That hum is the bureaucratism of Koskan Kanona," the shadow whines. Its voice is like pure shortwave distortion. It has particular tonal attributes, none of which she can clearly associate with anything like gender or age. "I am surprised that you have not learned by now to recognize it." The shadow steps between Essia and the mountains. "The vibration is what gives these windows, and a fortiori the scene they open onto,
their special clarity.
You wanted to see me? Essia says. S233? The shadow appears to stiffen, as if it has taken offense to being addressed abruptly.
Who are you?
It asks, as if it were asking, who do you think you are?
Essia
Melakalos,
Ah,
the shadow says, and perambulates around the room, avoiding the center, leaving the floor and slithering along the walls instead, up to the ceiling, then down again, talking quietly all the time.
here, evolution developed in a bureaucratic way, most efficient of ways,
The voice murmurs distractedly, automatically.
Instead of survival of the fittest, here plants and animals survived because they could wait in line, get just the right protein in just the right spot, produce a reference from the right fungus. All of life here grew in locks and keys.
This sounds to me like patter. Essia turns in place, watching the shadow slither down over the pane of the big window, like a paper doll cut from a dingy shower curtain. As the light passes through its membrane, a badge with the words Managing Sensor becomes visible, hiding the heart.
I understand, the voice says with sudden sharpness, that you have petitioned our department for a copy of a biological computer human analog.
Yes, Essia says.
The original of which belongs to the Izalu MF?
Yes,
And that original is named
the FIFA. The outline floats just under the ceiling, all dark again. The snake around its neck arches itself down, and the giant member dangles, making parentheses around the managing sensor's hands gestures.
You will have to fill out an extraordinary form.
This sounds ominous. Who do I give this to? Essia asks, pulling out the form she brought with her. The shadow pivots in midair, swinging itself head downwards.
Let me see.
It snatches the paper away and reads it over with its fingertips, like braille. It sighs.
No, it says, sounding a little disgusted. This is not for me. You must send that thing to the censoring counselor in 19 CGT.
The shadow drops the form, and something like a red rat or weasel grabs the form and twists out of sight. It had a little badge over its heart, too. The potted fern has a badge. So does the figure in the gloomy painting over the firefly place. Now that I notice, even the furniture is wearing badges. It transpires that the fill-out on an extraordinary form involves Essia getting into a bulky canvas suit that stands on a metal frame behind a curtain over there, and then climbing out the window into that forlorn landscape. She's going to have to cross the desolate plain and climb that high mountain far off in the dim distance. The form can only be found at its base, and can only be filled and submitted at its peak. The shadow suggests Essia take a look through a pair of opera glasses. Evidently, there's a line of people waiting at the base of the mountain, long enough to be seen from here. Essia climbs into the suit, grumpily. Anything else? She asks, once she has it on. The collar is a metal gorget. She looks like she's sticking her head up out of a manhole. The shadow points impressively to a spear standing in the corner behind the metal frame. Essia picks it up and hefts it while the shadow throws the window open. A blast of air fills the room, sending papers and the lighter knickknacks flying. Essia doesn't need to be shown the metal rings down the front of the suit, but slides the spear into them. The butt end is going to wag around her face. She climbs down the rope ladder that the shadow has just tossed over the sill. Essia climbs down 100 feet from the high windowsill, the rope ladder swinging in place before a sheer rock wall. The moment she alights on the ground, the ladder lifts away. Essia begins to walk directly toward the mountain. Her feet kick up sputters of static and green sparks that rise in swaying streaks and disappear. The canvas suit protects her against electrocution by the ground's latent electrical charge. As she makes her way down a short slope to the level of the plane, a nozzle on the neck of her suit begins to smoke out a little shimmery plume of chemistry, breaking ozone down into regular oxygen. It's as dead out here as a giant parking lot. Something is making a sound like crickets, but nothing obviously living can be seen. There's just the sound. There's no wind, but there are big, inflated things of all different shapes and sizes rolling about the land. What happened to that intense wind through the window, she wonders irrelevantly. Many of the inflatables have windows in them and even little lights on inside, like balloon houses. Essia goes up to one, and it tumbles toward her, gathering speed. She tries to get out of the way, but the thing swerves with her. Then she remembers the spear. That's the right move. She jabs awkwardly at the thing, punching holes in it, and the released gas jets it away from her, and out of range of her static attraction. I don't know if it's alive. It has an organic appearance. Now, Essia has to keep that spear working constantly to make any progress at all, and she pretty soon realizes she can't stick to the straight path to the mountain. The big tumblers threaten to bowl her over, maybe plant themselves on top of her. If that happens, she's liable to be pinned and stuck in her bulky attire. The little ones pose the same threat if enough of them can pile on top of her. Essia starts zigzagging, connecting the dots of the little piles of stones and slightly elevated places, where she seems to be less at risk from the tumblers. Up ahead, there are patches thick with tumblers she'll have to avoid. She plots out a path, pausing now and then to crush a micro-tumbler under her boot. Sweat drips from her nose, and her eyes are watering, but she can't touch them with her rough gloves or sleeves. And her staticky hair is starting to stand on end. Essia sets her jaw. She grabs one of the metal rings used to hold the spear in place and rips it from her suit with a great effort, then pulls her hair back through and around it. So that's that taken care of. I'll be back after lunch. I'm back. She's still plodding along. No food or water. The mountain looks about as far away as it did when I left. The sky is the same, like an ocean upside down. The only noise is Asia's heavy breathing, the cricket sound, the jingle of the empty spear loops, the buzz and sputter of her staticky feet, and the occasional hollow boom of a tumbler as she pokes it away. This just keeps going on the same way, so I'll check in tomorrow at breakfast. It's tomorrow. No change. Asia looks like hell. She's stumbling, gasping. Her jaw is hanging. There's iron filings all over the inside of her mouth, and her eyes are glazed. Whenever a tumbler comes near, anguish twists her face, and the effort to jab it away is so great she nearly falls flat, making it. She can't lie down. The tumblers will bury her in minutes. Well, but she's made it. She doesn't notice, but the ground under her feet is different. The sparks aren't coming up when she steps anymore, and the tumblers are all behind her. I want to yell out to her that she can stop, but she's still in mush mode. There she is, crawling up a slope of loose rocks to take her place at the back of the line. Everybody on the line is sitting down. Some still wear their canvas outfits, others have chucked them and stand or sit there in sweat-soaked clothes or stark naked. Just waiting, no conversation. They're all wiped out. They all look like hell, scraping filings off their tongues with their fingernails. The line must have had at least 100 people in it, and it moves irregularly. Essia got in line without any discernible moment of realization, still a zombie, motionless for what seems like hours, and then shuffling right along. The line starts somewhere up around the bend. Who knows how long it is. There's also something white up there, standing by the front of the line. Essia thinks it might be a lonely guidepost or like a roadside shrine until a flash of something transparent awakens in her the obvious fantasy that it might be a water cooler. I can see the awareness of her thirst hit her again, and she goes crazy, rips off the steaming canvas outfit and throws the spear into the rocks. Her clothes are wringing wet. After a while, another petitioner, an older man with silver hair and a face the color of boiled lobster, panting, coughing, staggers up the slope and drags himself into place behind Essia in line. It turns out the white thing is a water cooler with an elaborately ornamented porcelain tank. The cup dispenser is long empty, so Essia has to turn her head as far around as it will go and shove it into the tap. She drinks the tepid, slightly stale water in a frenzy, letting it run all over her face. Hey! The older man behind her calls hoarsely. Hey! Don't waste that. By now, there are other people behind him, too, and they all add their voices feebly to his. But a man in a crisp white outfit is already refilling the tank, whistling a little ditty as water from nowhere pours out from between his uplifted hands. Essia turns the corner. The front of the line is only a dozen or so patrons away. A steel enamel frame has been built into a cleft, and there's a heavy brown curtain there. A yellow hand droops nervelessly between the labia, stirring once in a while to feel the material of the curtains. The first in line watches this hand with a hypnotically fixed eye. When the hand suddenly points at someone, that one is allowed to go in through the curtains. When Asia's turn finally comes, she pushes through the curtains without being able to see who the hand belongs to, and begins climbing an interminable flight of iron steps that ascends the mountain. She knows she's supposed to get the form at the bottom of the mountain, but there is no place to get any form, just the stairs. As she climbs, her eggs aching unbelievably, her endurance already utterly spent, she is tortured by the idea that she might be turned away at the top for not having the form. She must be thinking that maybe the form was abolished or things have changed so that now you get the form at the peak and maybe submit it at the bottom when you get back down again. Or maybe you have to go to some other fucking mountain. A gap opens in the clouds, and the constellations wheel in the opening. Essia is so taken aback by the sight of space, the night sky, the untwinkling stars that she stops where she is. This stairway has no landings. You have to hold on where you are, clutching the framework of the cage, which is made of metal so thin you'll cut yourself if you clutch it. Essia gets a weird look on her face, and she reaches out to the stars in a way that makes me think she's lost it, and she's going to try to hug the sky and end up falling through the cage. Instead, her outstretched arms are laved in glowing sky sperm that resolves into a little shower of red bugs, maybe ants, and a sheet of wasp paper. It's the form. Meanwhile, what's going on out there? The sirens wailing in chasmic streets have become caressing croons. The cops are billowy and roly-poly as balloons. Their faces are sleeping and rumpled. Their hands are floating like bundles of inflatable hot dogs, drawing their slack, boneless arms up in snaky belly dance gestures as they walk down the street, leaning half backwards. Meanwhile, on screen, a full-on pantomime communistic upsurging has broken out across the U.S. Everybody's dressing freaky and quoting Marx. Suddenly, the impoverished urbanic, suburban, and rurative are clasped in solidarity, and the cops and soldiers are going over. Next thing you know, bombs are going off everywhere and a clatter of AK-47s, not among the protesters, instead coming from mysterious persons who are alternately attacking them and posing among them. Yesterday's terrorists, paid by the U.S. to pose as revolutionaries, splitting their earnings to pay for a new form of female circumcision that removes the brain as well as the clitoris, and the other half they take to Vegas, where suspiciously prescient tycoon types with generic names have already set up halal casinos on a segregated ship built in hours by Chinese companies, complete with 24-hour mosques, brothels stacked with wall-to-wall blondes, and an exact reproduction of the Burger King they demolished Muhammad's house in Mecca to build. Whose story is it? Or which one? I want to walk out of the theater, turn to go, walk right into a screen and look through it to see, on the far side, Another darkened theater, and the dim flicker over the faces turned toward me, watching me, but as an image only. And there's a screen behind those faces, and through that, the darkened theater and dim flicker over those faces, and to one side and another, and in me, I see the screens and the faces through the screens. Back to the story. I'm driving Carolina to see one of the Ahoysian cities, and she won't make small talk or flirt back or anything. She takes mescaline and asks me to go back to the story and fill in what happens next. Okay, so Essia just found the form, and she looks up and she sees that there are offices in the sky, spreading out like an infinite graph that intersects with the vertex of the mountain peak at a single tingling spark that she can fit through. They're like pueblos quarried into the sky, and they're like opera boxes. It's that dark corridor with illuminated doors and no walls again, and Essia is going somewhere flanked by the two dandruff giants again. She's like a little girl on an official business call with her father and his twin brother. Their faces are up too high, so she knows them by their dragging heavy hands, their bread loaf fingers curling up into the palms, half covered by stiff white cuff-linked cuffs, and hanging straight at their sides. Coarse hairs on the backs of their hands look up into cavernous, hairy nostrils. A succession of colorless images flashes on her. The inexplicable movement from one to the other is tied to her steps. Each one ends in a still photo. A woman, seen from a low angle in a stone doorway, speaking and twirling a white tablecloth or towel. Stop. Boys in swim trunks, flashing in silhouette past a bright open doorway, waving thin arms. One stops, framed in the doorway, to look up at the camera. Stop. A reclining, supercilious-looking man with a prominent nose talking, cigarette held up near his face, elbow resting on something, then swings it down to ash, lowering heavy-lidded eyes and saying something to himself with a mouth that warps and facets itself. Stop. Three men rounding a corner post and heading under a dark canopy of stone. The middle man in a pale suit and a snap brim hat, and the other two in dark suits with swing ties and bare heads. Stop. A young girl with a stricken look on her face, numbly descending a short flight of stone steps. Stop. An old woman stands up and begins to harangue someone, her old eyes furious, waving a relentless finger. Stop. A man, viewed from behind, sitting in a chair with his feet up. Waves wash the shore down below, and he's in the grip of a vivid fantasy. Now it lapses, and there's a barely perceptible change. The body slackens, the blood settles, and the pressured dome around the head shrinks back down into the brain. Stop. A boy, starting up out of a nightmare, still with his mask of fear, outrage, betrayed by sleep. Stop. A woman on a bench, engrossed in reading, circling her thumb against her index finger, abstractedly. Stop. Her own head, hair swinging like a cape, framed against the white arch, under the cloister. Stop. Essia has arrived at the censors. She is conducted past holding galleries, where witches are put to the question. The galleries are light and airy, with tables of fruit, wine bottles standing ready, beer kegs, loaves of bread and blocks of cheese, platters of meat. Beautiful, elf-like people flit to and fro to provide the witches with whatever they please. Many of the witches are bobbing in hot tubs, or frolicking in fountains, or lounging themselves on curtained couches. These witches are caught and dragged forth from sordid covens where they torture and interrogate each other endlessly, brought here to have confessions extracted from them by high living. The Censors is a handsome English manor house, not really large, standing out abrupt as a cork in the landscape, surrounded by sweetly unassuming flower beds and vegetable plots, lush trees sparsely scattered with ample room between for bocce ball and badminton and bumbaklati ball or whatever rich people games they play. Over the court there is a stone head, a lean ascetic face with hawk nose and little round glasses and pinched lips, flanked by stylized depictions of rejection stamps, pairs of scissors, strikeout grease pencils, airbrushes. Engraved on a banner beneath the face, there is a motto that has been censored. Creak inside. There's a white hall with the floral runner, a grandfather's clock, and flowers in the brass bowl on marble counter below a mirror that brushes the ceiling below the landing, below the skylight, below the tall, skinny chimneys. The house trembles with people, stepping from room to room with paper sheaves, calling to each other, answering old-school phones, tuning an old-school radio to a softly singing woman's voice like a crooning cloud, carrying trays of refreshments, and there's a stout man with a white mustache and a straw hat standing outside smoking a battered battle pipe, visible through one of the wavy windows as he takes a pace this way and then back, scanning the horizon like a retired sea captain. It's fucking quaint, let me tell you, like the American cancellate in Shambleshire. Essia's old man escort peels off like a pair of sidecar motorcycles, and she is instantly transferred to the care of a woman in green tights, and a green skirt and green blouse and green cardigan and green earrings with big green leaves in her hair. She conducts Essia into a room full of tables, and now they have to walk from one table to another. I think that if they touch the floor, they will have to go back to the door and start over. Their goal seems to be a desk in the corner with a woman sitting at it. She's smoking, reading a newspaper spread on the blotter in front of her. She has a thick mane of white hair, and seems to be wearing nothing but a negligently belted kimono hanging open. It turns out the form Essia retrieved is only the form for getting the right form, which she receives from the woman with the white hair. Rather than go back to the desks, Essia climbs out the window and lets herself down into the garden. Garden of prepositions. The with to the at. Down, the above when. She perches on the rim of the cement bird bath and fills the form out on the low slung backside of a marble nymph. Then goes back to the house and calls up to one of the windows. A man's hand, a very fine, manicured, bejeweled hand, but plainly a man's, unfurls out the window like the arm of a sea anemone and takes the form very elegantly between the last knuckles of two fingers. After a moment, a woman's hand, brown calloused and square, but a woman's, with big baubles around the wrist, emerges from the same window with a ticket. Essia takes the ticket, which reads, Form received.